right. Well, we're going to open this evening hearing from Robin Eve Jasper, head of the NoMa Parks Foundation. Robin Eve?
Hi, Steve. Thank you. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us for another in this more than 6-year long series of conversations with the community about NoMa Parks. I'm really excited to be here tonight and for the designers to show you the design and to hear back from you all. So without more, I'd like to introduce the three panelists we have tonight. We're joined by Nick Kushner, who's a community planner with the DC Department of Parks and Recreation, one of our partners in the DC government for building and designing these parks. And Adrian McCrae, who is a fantastic landscape architect with Lee and Associates, and who is one of the principal designers of Swampoodle across the street. So thank you, Nick and Adrian, for joining us tonight. And with that, I would hand it back to Steve Brigham, who's going to be our MC for the evening. Anybody who has participated in any of our community conversations knows Steve, perhaps without a beard, pre-pandemic. So Public Engagement Associates has done a great job, and we're in good hands tonight with Steve and Kim Sesko handling it. So thank you, guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Robin Eve. Yeah, I feel like maybe I've aged since the pandemic first hit. Welcome, everybody. Glad to be back, even though it's on Zoom. Can't see everyone's faces, but it's great to be able to do this program tonight where we're sharing another opportunity for parks in the neighborhood. So tonight, we're just going to give a refresher, especially for folks who may not have attended NoMa Parks Foundation meetings at all or recently, just so that you're clear on what its mission is and the work that it's done throughout the NoMa neighborhood. But the central reason is really to review the proposed design for Swampoodle II Park, so right across the street from Swampoodle 1. So the meeting agenda is pretty simple. We are going to be doing some opening polling in a moment. So you may remember, if you've been at some of our face-to-face meetings, everyone gets a polling device. Well, we can do polling in Zoom as well. And then Robin Eve will come back and give the overview and a little bit on the kind of the range of projects that the Parks Foundation has undertaken over the last few years. And then the main event really is Adrian's presentation on the proposed design for Swampoodle 2. And after both of those presentations, we'll have a fairly extensive Q&A period. So for those who may not be familiar with Zoom webinar, there's actually a separate Q&A button there, which I'll explain in a minute. And then we'll wrap up around 8 o'clock, just sharing what the next steps are, what you can expect with regard to the finishing the design and the schedule for the park. So in terms of a brief orientation to Zoom. So at the bottom center of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button. So throughout the presentations, if you have specific questions, click on the Q&A, type your questions, submit it. It will go to our folks here from Lee and Associates and NoMa Parks Foundation. If they're simple, straightforward, those answers may come back in a chat. If they're more complicated, we'll reserve them for later on. If throughout or in several points during the evening, especially at the end, we're going to open up the chat with some specific questions just to get your own perspective on the design of this park. As I said, we're going to be doing polling. We'll do polling shortly, and we also have a set of questions that we'll ask you at the end of the evening. You may want to make sure in Zoom, usually in the top right-hand corner, to be on full screen so you can see everything that is on the slides, especially the particulars of the design that Adrian will share. And then finally, we are recording this session, and a somewhat excerpted version will go up on the website afterwards. And you will also, if you require captioning, that will be happening throughout the event. And as you can see, we are currently, and will be doing the entire event with an ASL interpreter. All right, so that's how you use Zoom. That's what we'll be doing tonight in terms of the tools. Now I'm going to ask you to get ready to share your perspective on some things. So I'm going to open up the polling and just give me 1 second. So the first question, where do you live? So you're going to have to scroll down. There's actually 4 here. Single answer, all 4 of them. So all you have to do is click on the answer that applies to you. Second question is around how familiar you are with NoMa Parks Foundation and its public-private partnership. Third question is around how often you've attended, if you have at all, NoMa Parks meetings. And fourth is around your familiarity with current Swampoodle Park. So I'm going to give you some time to scroll through and answer all those questions. And I think we're going to get a little bit of a music to accompany that. I'm going to close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see the results. So, and you'll have to scroll down with me. So we've got 76% of you actually live in NoMa. Not a big surprise. I live elsewhere in DC, but near NoMa is the other 24%. So folks who have a direct kind of living relationship with NoMa neighborhood. Second question was around familiarity with NoMa Parks Foundation. And so again, most people are familiar, 90%, 5% not sure, 5% no. So welcome to you. If but 48%, scrolling down to the next one, 48%, this is your first meeting. So that's awesome. That means that you get to hear even more about NoMa Parks Foundation, all the great work that it's done over the last 5-6 years. And we have 10%. Feels like every single one. I wouldn't be surprised because I know we have a lot of veterans, and then we have about 43% who have attended a couple or 3 or 4. And then finally, your familiarity with the current Swampoodle Park. So almost 2/3 are very familiar, another 33% pretty familiar, 5% somewhat familiar. So that's really helpful for us to know just who's participating with us tonight. Like I said, we will pose some more polls at the end of the evening. You may need to close out the polling screen on your screen. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't when I close it on mine. All right, and so with that, I'm going to ask Nick Kushner to come on screen. As Robin Eve said, he's Capital Projects Planning and Design Officer at DC Department of Parks and Recreation. Nick, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for attending tonight. This project is one that we're really excited about at DPR. It's been great working with the NoMa Parks Foundation over the last few years and delivering so many great recreational and park assets to the NoMa neighborhood. And we feel like this is going to be a gem right across the street from the original Swampoodle. I think the design complements it really well, really nicely, and really meets the needs that we've heard from the community in providing both an active and passive recreational space for community gatherings. So again, thank you so much. We're happy to be here, and I look forward to hearing from all of you tonight.
Great, and thanks, Nick. Thanks for being a part of this project. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it back to Robin Eve, who, like I said, she'll give a short presentation on the Parks Foundation and its work, and then she's going to hand it directly to Adrian, who's going to give a longer presentation on the proposed design. Again, if you want to ask questions, click on the Q&A, type your questions in there, and then we will answer some along the way and others at the very end of the program. And I am going to now share my screen, Robin Eve, as you as I switch over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And I'll start by saying Swampoodle 2 is not the official name of the park. It's just a working name, and we will be asking the community for input like we always have on naming. So I don't want anybody to be deceived by the fact that we're calling it Swampoodle 2. There will be a process for naming this park, and the community may say, well, Swampoodle 2 makes the most sense, and that would be it. that would be the recommendation. Anyway, so here we are. I want to just really quickly review the history to the very minimal amount, because I bet a lot of the people know it here. The NoMa Parks is related to the NoMa bid. The NoMa bid is a taxing district that covers a 35 block area, but when the NoMa bid delivers services, it really thinks about the broader community, something that a planner like Nick might typically consider when they were considering a neighborhood, which is basically 0.8 miles radius circle, like a 10-minute walk in any direction. NoMa is the most dense mixed-use neighborhood in DC, which for everybody who lives in NoMa, you can appreciate how really, while different during the pandemic, the neighborhoods maintain the kind of vitality that some other neighborhoods haven't. There are 25 million square feet of commercial and residential space in the NoMa bid now. In 1998, there was pretty much nothing in NoMa, so it's really rapidly growing. And the NoMa Parks Foundation is a public-private partnership between it's an effort with the DC government to, in this rapidly growing neighborhood with what people describe as a very hot real estate market, it was an effort to make sure that we could deliver public spaces that residents would need in a timely way, because the opportunities for acquiring land and building parks were really evaporating very quickly when we established the NoMa Parks Foundation in 2012. Next slide, please. So the NoMa Parks Foundation, it's a 501c3 organization. It was needed because, unlike other city neighborhoods, NoMa didn't have any parks planned for the neighborhood. The idea when the city was bankrupt, there was a notion that this industrial area behind Union Station, which was really just vacant lots and mostly abandoned warehouses at the time, could be used as an economic engine to help grow the city's economy again. And it worked really well. And what they thought at the time was that it was going to be pretty much all office space, almost like a suburban office park. And when they thought about that back in the late 1990s, they really didn't think that parks would be needed. Fast forward to about 2008, 2009, 2010, and the board of directors of the NoMa bid and the leadership there said, holy moly, people are moving into apartment buildings here, and we think that's a trend that's going to grow. And we don't have any land for parks in the neighborhood. What do we do? And so through a partnership with the American Planning Association and a variety of community engagements, we developed the NoMa Public Realm Design Plan. Steve, I think if we advance, that might help. So the bid established the NoMa Parks Foundation as a related entity that is a true charitable organization. And we hired AECOM, and we engaged community stakeholders, and we tried to figure out, how can we add and create parks in this neighborhood that has none? And we also said, well, what is a park, right? So we thought, well, there's one definition of a park. It's a little patch of green and you can do some stuff in it. But then we realized that really people, I'm going to use the word, hire parks to do different jobs. It's a kind of business school theory about jobs to be done. And some of these different jobs were what we looked at. And you can see from the graphic on the right, there's recreation, there's, places for people to just gather, there's places for people to hang out and see and be seen, there's art that inspires and illuminates. So we kind of thought about, well, what are all the jobs that we want to have done, or does the community want to have done with these parks? And through our community outreach, we really kind of honed in on those community aspirations for parks. The public realm design plan was shared and supported, and we took it to the DC Council and then Mayor Vince Gray, and each enacted, together they enacted a law that established the public-private partnership and funded it with a $50 million grant. So the public realm design plan is the, kind of guidebook for everything that we do. And when we get permission from the government to proceed on a new project, they're always looking at the guidelines in the public realm design plan to make sure it fits. And the way we have, and just so that all of these parks, the NoMa Parks Foundation does not own them. We're kind of more in the development, the acquisition of land, the development process, and all of the parks are in fact owned by the DC government. We have over the last 6 years worked really intimately with the community through a community conversation process that's largely been supported by public engagement associates. And also, so those were like face-to-face meetings on every park until the pandemic happened. We've moved those to virtual, and some of you may have participated in our recent, our last April we had, or last May, we had a meeting on the virtual circle public space designs virtually. We have also had many kind of polls over the years, voting processes, around everything from naming to, aspirations for different parks. So here is just a quick representation of some of the projects we've completed. In the last 6 years, I think we've had a great track record. We've designed, I think, 7 parks. We've constructed 4 parks. We partnered with DDOT on the virtual circle. We've added more than 3 acres of parkland to NoMa, and we've created millions of dollars of value for the DC government by acquiring land below appraised value, by taking donations of land, by pairing public land with privately owned land and making it publicly accessible. So this is the park, an image of the park across the street, Swampoodle Park, on opening day. And as you can see, this park was the first park that we built, and it was in a neighborhood that was parkless. It was a place for people to gather, to bring their dogs who desperately needed a place to go and play, and to bring their children. And so this is an incredibly active 8,000 feet, park. There were, more than 100 people there on opening day. And I think it continues to be well loved and well used by the community. We have the underpass installations. The motivation for these installations was the kind of difficult conditions that always existed in the NoMa underpasses, and the idea that NoMa was bisected by this very muscular train infrastructure. And some people thought at the time, well, you'll get development on one side, but not on the other because of this, the train tracks creating that big divider in the neighborhood. And we saw pretty early in the 2010 teens, or before the teens actually, that that development really was going on east and west of the train tracks, and people needed to go under the train tracks all the time, and we were trying to make that a comfortable, appealing condition for people. So these are the two at the first one's at M Street. We're under the Amtrak train there, and the other one on the right side is at L Street, Lightweave. Most recently opened park is Alethea Tanner Park. This was our largest land acquisition. We were fortunate to acquire from Pepco 2 acres of land and get an option on an additional 2 acres of land. And it was an abandoned rail use site. It had previously been kind of a trolley car turnaround and station area, but then it had been used for construction staging. So it was really not a pretty spot. And right now, this is the way it looks as it starts blooming at the beginning of its second season. And it's, I think, been a boon to lots of neighbors during the pandemic. We haven't been able to kind of celebrate and have the grand opening that we'd always hoped for, but we've been delighted to see it used and looking forward to a time when the virus is sufficiently under control that we can have a big party and celebrate the opening of that park. Lots of you have either participated in or read about the partnership with DDOT to design the 1.3 acres of public space that were created or will be created from the acquisition of the Wendy's at the intersection of New York and Florida Avenue, and the realignment of those streets so that they just make a big intersection rather than the kind of circle that's there now that really is very almost impossible for pedestrians and bikes to navigate and hard for cars to navigate. And one of the things I'd like to point out about this is, we partnered early on when we realized that this, we pushed with the community, actually, with lots of support from the community to see this happen. And then when it was funded, we ran over to DDOT and we said, we want to be your partner on this. And we worked with the community and with the Urban Land Institute. We had them constitute a technical advisory panel. And we started to create some direction. And the early designs for DDOT for this space really were just grass panels and sidewalks. But you can see now with the approved design, we've integrated some play spaces, we've integrated community gathering spaces, we've got some spots where there could be art in there, and it just, it's just another beautiful space. And well, I mean, it's not a perfect set of conditions environmentally, but I think with the amount of green and the bermed walls we've established, I think it's going to be some very pleasant places that people will be able to use in the neighborhood. And the last slide is our beautiful new acquisition, which you can see there on the left. It is basically the same size as Swampoodle Park, and it is a vacant lot. We were lucky to be able to acquire it from Douglas Development. We had tried to buy it actually way back when after we'd acquired Swampoodle, because we thought bookends would be great for the neighborhood. And also Swampoodle was so small, we felt like we really needed to respond to some of the people who said they wanted a space for passive recreation, given how active Swampoodle designs were. But we couldn't acquire it at the time from Douglas. But then really fortunately this past summer, we had made an offer on it before, and Douglas decided that it was time to sell it, and they reached back out to us, and we were able to snag it for the neighborhood. So we're really excited about that and excited about the design that Adrian is going to show you. So with that, I will hand it off to Adrian McRae, our star designer.
So just want to say welcome everyone. Thank you for joining in for us to hear this presentation this evening. Again, I'm with Lee and Associates. We're landscape architects located here in DC. For those of you guys that don't know, we've been in the city for 34 years, and we do a lot of projects primarily within the DC area. And so we get to know the neighborhoods really well. And we had a lot of fun working on Swampoodle Park. And so it's really exciting that we have the opportunity to be able to jump across the street and participate in this process as well. And so this first slide is showing just an overlay of the slide that Rob and Eve shared earlier that shows the overview of all of the parks within the NoMa area. And the orange circle shows the half-mile radius, and the quarter-mile is the darker circle in the side. And that little yellow box in the center, that's where our new park is, right across the street. And here you can see there's L Street, this aerial view, and then 3rd Street is here. So we've got our existing Swampoodle on the south side, and right across we've got our future Swampoodle Park location. And so here's some photos of the site, just to give you this idea if you're not familiar. The existing building that's on the north side of the site has the mural. And then what you see on the backside is really the backyards of a lot of the adjacent property owners. The image on the bottom here gives you, we're standing in the back end of the site, and you have 3rd Street over here and L Street's coming across here. So from here, you can see we're at a higher elevation. And so we get really good vantage looking back across the street to Swampoodle once we remove this fencing that's located here. And then you can kind of see how this gradually slopes down towards 3rd Street. This series of images here, the top ones are showing L Street. And so you can see how much of a grade change we're working with. Currently, there are 2 sets of stairs along L Street that take you to the top area. And then the images on the bottom are showing the 3rd Street side. So from 3rd Street, you can see we can get a accessible access onto the site. This is looking down towards the crosswalk where Swampoodle is. And then here we're looking back up 3rd Street, back to the neighborhoods, and just want to highlight this connection to Union Market development is along 3rd Street as well. So here, one of the things with the Swampoodle Park that's on the south side is we do get the benefit of having a lot of shade from that adjacent development. Here, we're the opposite. We've got a lot of sun that'll be hitting this site. So that's definitely a consideration in our design. And then this is just kind of an existing condition analysis. As you can see, the entire property right now is asphalt drive. We've got steep slopes with their stairs. This building that's located here, where the mural is, that building is going to remain. It belongs to the district. The building that's on this side is up for redevelopment. But again, we don't really have any control over what happens along this site, this edge. So we're going to just design it as if we don't have that access on that side. And so some of the goals that we were looking at as we're approaching the project, primary goal is to further NoMa Park's mission, and that's to provide publicly accessible space for the residents and workers and people that are visiting the community. We want to offer opportunities for art and culture within the space, and we want to provide relaxation, recreation for a diversity of users, age groups, as well as different user groups. We want to provide interactive art and really activate the space, come up with different ways that we can program activities in the space. And then we want to connect with the aesthetics of Swampoodle that's right across the street. And so this this is a programming diagram looking down at plan view. And so what we're looking at here is for the little pink circles here are where our access points are for our future design. And as we said, for the 3rd Street side, we want to make sure that we have an accessible way to get into the site for not just wheelchairs, strollers, and any other type of person that just doesn't want to climb up, navigate up a steep slope. And then on this side, on the 3rd Street side, we thought this is a opportunity where we're going to have to do some type of stair system, but we want to do something really creative and something that really speaks to what's happening across the street. And we also want to look at how we're connecting across the street, not just visually, but also physically getting over. And then this existing stairs that are located here, we decided we're going to just keep those so that we have a 3rd means of egress from the site. Within the space, we've divided it up into 3 different zones. The plaza entrance zone is really a zone that connects from the 3rd Street entrance all the way through across the L Street entrance into all of the spaces. But behind that, we have created what we're calling an activity zone. And keep in mind, all of these spaces are considered passive recreation, but we see this as being more of a space where we can put down a soft surface. We can have a lot of different types of activities that can happen within it on just a different type of surface material. And then on the far side, on the west side, we look at this as our active zone that's more of a hardscape plaza type of space. And this is a rendering view looking at our site from, this is the L Street side and the 3rd Street side. And then we've got the Swampoodle, the existing Swampoodle Park that's here. And I just wanted to show you this to show you how we're really looking at this public edge. One of the real key things that we looked at with Swampoodle Park was that making sure that we're blurring the line between public space and private space. And we want to make sure that we extend that on the side of the street. And so we're using that same type of vernacular with the curved walls, with the wood benches on top of it, and the same type of paving material that's coming through the space. And we want to make sure that we have very wide entrances for where we're creating our more accessible access into the park. But then we also look at this entrance as not just a set of stairs, but we wanted to create an amphitheater where people could, if they don't want to actually go all the way into the park, they could kind of sit along these seat walls, read a book, gather with friends. So this becomes its own space as you're going into the park as well. This is looking in plan view down at the site. So we've got L Street on the bottom and 3rd Street here. And as you can see, we've widened how wide this access is here. And then you can then see our amphitheater that's booked end with 2 planting areas. And then our main entrance plaza, it actually kind of turns into this oval that's in the center. And we what we ended up doing was we divided into partial hardscape and then partial soft. And what the soft is a synthetic turf. And we really see this as being a space where young kids, toddlers can come and roll around in the space, and adults can bring out yoga mats and have yoga classes. But we also see this as being really kind of one space of its own that's really kind of more of a level area. And then on the outside of our oval, we have a secondary turf area. And the way that we're distinguishing that is going with like a longer blade of turf. And then we're also creating a little bit of a slope that's coming up off of this. So it's really like a bowl that's sitting down in the center. And then we've got a gentle slope coming up. And what that is intended to do is really distinguish this as its own zone, maybe a more quiet, passive space than what's happening down in this active area. And then we've got a line of benches for seating opportunity along the back. Within this, our plaza on the west side of the site, what we've done is we've integrated a boxcar. And here's an image of what we're thinking about. And really, we see this as being an opportunity to offer storage for various program activities and elements to be placed in, and then the community can come open it up and bring things out, and that will help to activate the space. And with that, we've also highlighted this area with string lights to really, we see that as becoming a space where this could be more performance type of functions, and or when it's not happening, we've got seating areas where people can come and also either meet with groups or as individuals as well. But this could definitely be a place where we've got chairs, movable chairs and tables that are stored away, and then during the day they can be brought out into this space just to provide an active space. And our planting concepts are really, if we go back down to the streetscape level, we looking at in Swampoodle, we've got the series of the crepe myrtles. And so we brought those over to the outside of the park as well to just really create that connection. And we showed you that image of what's going on with the sunshade study. So the trees that are kind of lined up along the top edge of the park, and through here, we are actually going to proposing to get larger shade trees, getting a larger caliper that we're putting in place so that we really create that nice little, enhance that bowl and also create more shade opportunities here. Behind that, behind the turf area, we've got a planting bed where along this wall, we want to create a magnolia espalier. So this is an image of what we have in mind of just having this trained tree that kind of starts to cascade up the sides of the wall to really soften that space up. And then one of the things that we're also looking at is along the fence line, we want to create connections back to Swampoodle. And so we're creating a unique fence that's also a trellis system. So we see that, images like this, the trellis growing along the fence line in here. And so just overall, we're definitely using planting material to create the mood and to really soften up the space as well. And then we're also going to be looking at areas where we can do things like bioretention. I remember I told you how the site kind of slopes down in here. So right now we're showing one bioretention area. There may end up needing to be more than that, but for now, we're looking at probably this lower edge for that type of treatment of the stormwater runoff. This diagram is showing where our fences are going to be placed for the site. And one of the things with Swampoodle, with the Walhalla, it's really intended to be for kind of older children to be able to play. And so when we're thinking about spaces for younger toddlers, we thought that it would be a good idea to have a protected fenced-in zone for that type of activity. And so the red dash is referencing where our fence line is going to be coming through. And this little area here is our homage to our Walhallas. We're actually stepping this line up, this fence line up with our trellis system, and creating more of a connection to that Walhalla. The rest of the fences will be very similar to what you're seeing over at Swampoodle Park as well. And so this is our homage to the Walhallas, what I was talking about. We were basically creating a stepped up trellis wall that has window cutouts along it. And we see this, we're basically going to create a high top table that could be used as a working station if people want to come out and you make this their outdoor office. And then also what it does is it frames views from inside the park as well as outside the park, across the street to the other Swampoodle Park. This elevation is just showing the back side of the site back here of what our espalier trees could look like, along with the people sitting on benches. And here we've got a section that's cutting through. So we've got our boxcar located at the top, and then you can just kind of see how our site is sloping down. Right now, I think the existing slope starts about right here. And so we're going to bring that out a little bit, the planting area out a little bit more, so that we can start to try to soften that slope a little bit more, to create more of a less of a steep slope in here. And then here we've got just showing where the stairs, what that's going to feel like, what that's going to look like. And again, you can see where that connection to the Walhalla is across the street. Here's just a section that's cutting through where we talked about that bioretention area. And so it's basically located on the lower site. Water filters in slowly, and then we'll have a under drain that takes the water away before it over inundates the stormwater system. And then this section is coming through the intersection area. And so you can just kind of see a lot of different seating opportunities for a lot of different users. And here we have a view that's looking across. This is L Street and then 3rd Street. So you can see the current Swampoodle and our future site and our 3rd Street entrance. And here is another view looking at our amphitheater from L Street into the park. And so it's the fun stuff. This is all the activation that we're talking about, and why we think it's so important to have this idea of this boxcar. These are the types of things that we can see storing within them, having kids come out and play with different types of game boards. We can do yoga. There's all types of movable seating. And here we've got additional activities. One of the projects that we did was at Dance Place, and they really look at a lot of different elements and ways that they can engage this space that we created the design for them in, and just having community dances is one of those ways. And then we see that just having a place to store things like building blocks for young children, and this is something that's we don't have room for play structures, but this is really a way to engage children in a different type of way. And again, we talked about that outdoor workspace and making sure we've got our Wi-Fi connection and plugs so that people can actually come out and be able to be outdoors as a different environment for them to work in. Some of our kit parts elements, we're looking at wood benches to go along with the wood cap seat walls that you're seeing currently in the Swampoodle Park. We want to bring that into the park as well with these types of softer wood benches. We talked about the trellis structures, and then there's always opportunities of public art being incorporated into the design. And then these are just some of the typical DPR standard elements, light fixtures and the trash receptacles and bike racks. And then here's an example when we talk about the different types of turf. This is like the lower blade turf. And then as we step to the back, we want to go with something that's a little bit taller. And looking at the type of paving, this is example of what's happening in Swampoodle. And this is what we want to bring to the public space on the opposite side. Once we get into the park, we do want to go with a different type of paving. I think we'll probably keep the same color palette, but go with a more linear paver so we can do a lot more really interesting things with the patterns within that space. And one of the neat things about being on the north part of the site is we have a range of plant materials that we can kind of expand our palette with that. And so with that, we want to open it up to questions for anyone.
Great. Thank you, Adrienne. Great presentation. A lot to take in there, right? But beautiful design. Thank you. So like I said, we are going to do some Q&A now. And I know that we've gotten many questions in the Q&A box, and we have some in chat. So I may be moving back and forth and trying to get through as many as I can. If it's not clear to me, so Robin, even Adrian, I'm going to be posing them to you. Sometimes it may be clear to me which ones I should ask to each of you, and sometimes it may not. So just let me know whenever you want to kind of step in. So the first question I'm seeing at the top here, and it's related back to Robin Eve, your presentation around the underpasses. And it talks about the underpasses not being appealing currently. And I know you've tried working on this situation. Do you foresee any progress?
I'm hopeful. The NoMa bid, which I recently left as president, but for about a year before I left and beyond then, we engaged an outreach organization called the H3 Project. And I think they demonstrated a lot of progress about the kinds of approaches that might be useful. We're hoping that those are replicable at some level. I mean, I think there's some lessons learned that could be even applied citywide. And also the conditions have gotten worse because of the pandemic. The Biden administration is, I believe, kind of created quite a lot more money for housing vouchers. And then on the other side of that, the district government has been working on a couple of elements that might improve it. One is kind of much better job of creating a shelter system that accommodates the needs of people who are not housed more appropriately in terms of their partners and their property and their special needs, whether they're medical or they're working. Anyway, so they've been working on that. And I think it'll depend on the community to kind of make sure that the government stays engaged in this issue and that the efforts are really thoughtful and perhaps kind of break the standard mold of, well, we've paid in and get some outreach teams, and that's what we're doing.
Right, thanks, Robin. Next one is for you, Adrian. It comes from the chat. It says, has there been any thought on turning the boxcar into a rotating vendor spot for local businesses? I know there is a similar concept by Navy Yard and the Wharf that has proven successful.
I think it definitely would be something that we would love to see. And I think it's really a matter of whether or not it can be programmed into the park. We're providing power into the space, and I think it could be designed to accommodate it. So there's a lot of different functions. It's really about what the community is really wanting to see, and what working with DPR and with NoMa bid to potentially execute that idea.
Great. So there's some comments here that kind of can be shaped into a question. So it was around a strong plus of having an enhanced shade focus. Swampoodle is brutal in the summer, allowing for only brief visits due to the lack of shade options. But there's also kind of a comment, just curious why all the NoMa parks and DC parks lack trees and green space. In this new design, it seems to be a lack of trees too, and no attempt to save the mature trees on the lot. Some NoMa parks feel sterile, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more just about at least the green space and the room for trees on this site, Adrian.
Yeah, so right now the site does not have any existing trees. There are two trees that are on an adjacent site that we will not be removing. There are some street trees that we will not be removing either. And so all of the trees that we're looking at will be new trees, and we're going to continue to study this and see the type of trees that we're planting to make sure that they're going to be have enough root volume, soil volume to be able to expand out to their full potential. And so I think as we continue to develop this, we'll take a closer look at it, where the trees are located, as well as the size, the type of trees that we're planting.
Great.
So
Okay, great, thank you. So Robin Eve, I'm curious to hear how you're going to answer this one. It says, any chance we can connect the two parks with a fun pedestrian overpass or hell, underpass?
It was a great question. The connection between the parks is part of one of our polling questions later on. I don't think that there will be an opportunity. Having built Swampoodle, I can tell you that the street is full of stuff. And even if it were economically feasible, we couldn't go under. And we wouldn't be allowed by DDOT to go over even if we had the budget. That said, you can see that there's been a question about how wide the crosswalk should be. And then there's been a lot of encouragement about approaching DDOT on the weekends to actually close the street. So that's one of our next set of meetings, is with the planners and folks at DDOT. And so we will definitely be raising the questions about how do we most safely and pleasantly connect these two parks.
Right, so this question I believe is for you, Adrian. It says, can the park be connected to gas lines for heating features so space can be used during cooler or colder months?
We can check, but I think that there is utilities on it. Right now, that's not one of our programs, and I think we have to talk, I think, to probably with DPR and to NoMa a little bit more to figure out how that could safely work, and how it would be managed as far as when it gets turned on, when it gets turned off. And so definitely something we'll put down and look into, explore it a little bit.
Okay. Robin Eve, this may be for you, but it also may be for you, Adrian. So it's about traffic implications. So it says, given increased foot traffic and kids in particular, how might the street between the two park sections be made more pedestrian friendly and safe? So that I think, Adrian, your presentation talked about that. So maybe we can start with you.
So one of the things that we're looking at is, as we're going to DDOT, that the crosswalk and how we, what kind of treatment that we make on it. A bigger gesture would be, as we're showing in this image, connecting from where our amphitheater is, and really making that pedestrian zone. And I think using the same type of paving materials, it lets drivers and other traffic know that as you're approaching this, you need to kind of slow down through the space.
Great. So then there's another question about trees. It says, will mature trees be planted on this site?
So we're going to get as large of trees as we can. There is kind of a limit in how large we want to go. I think we can probably go to about 6-inch caliper, and they can still be safely transplantable and not have a risk of not surviving. But we definitely want to bring in some large trees so that we can get a more immediate impact as far as the shade is concerned.
And if I could amplify what Adrian just said, because there are a bunch of questions about shade and trees and green. There are, as Adrian noted, there are limits to actually what you can plant in terms of the size of a tree. And 6 inches is really the outer edge. We planted at Alethea Tanner Park trees that were as large, really, for the most part, that could be planted, and planted more than 100 trees, like 120 trees. You know, these, when parks are built and the young trees are there and they're of a caliper of 6 inch or smaller, they look small. And it may look like the park is, the park itself may dwarf the trees. But over time, given the soil environments and the irrigation and other things that have been created for these trees will grow and will thrive. And you'll find, you know, in a period of years, because it just takes that long, that these trees will really be significant. And this park, as well as Swampoodle 1, when those crepe myrtles really start to grow, I think you'll see the shade canopy and the sense of green in these parks really magnified.
Great, thank you, Rob and Eve. There's a question here. It says, what happens to the existing community garden in this proposal?
I'll answer that.
Okay.
Because I was actually typing an answer to it. The community gardeners, we were in conversation with them since the site was acquired. And they have moved their plants from the site. And I know when Stacy West was still with the Parks Foundation, she had worked with the community gardeners. She'd worked to identify alternative spaces in the neighborhood where they could actually plant successfully their community, you know, their community was a guerrilla garden. And so my understanding is they've probably moved by now. I know there's no plants now. I knew they took everything out.
Great. Adrian, I think this next one is for you. It's talking about, could there be a retractable motorized shading feature that runs off direct sunning? We're getting really creative here. I love it.
I think it, if it was something that would attach maybe to our boxcar potentially, and that would be a really cool feature. I think it's also a budget balance thing, and so we would have to, you know, when you start to get into the motorized retractable things, they definitely jump up in cost as opposed to more manual things. And then it's also a maintenance add to it. And so it's definitely some ideas that, you know, we can look into, but we're also working to balance the funds of the project as well, so keeping that in mind.
All right, Rob and Eve, this one's for you. So this is about kind of driving and parking and the regulation. Many people are driving to the current park, parking illegally, and in most cases creating a bottleneck of traffic issues at 3rd and L at the intersection. How can the bid work with the DC Parking Authority and enforce parking within this area?
I can actually make a recommendation on that one. I'll type the answer, but the BID's Director of Public Space Operations, Dave Webb, has good relationships at DPW and knows who to talk to over there on parking enforcement matters. And so if you kind of raise concerns to Dave, I think that would be a good way to start to get this on the enforcer's radar.
Okay, great. So this is, it's a question and a kind of an appeal, and it's coming from chat. When will the naming activation take place? I think without question it should be named Earl Lloyd Park. He's an extremely significant individual in respects to the history of NoMa, yet many residents of the neighborhood and city have no idea who he is. He played on the very same block the park is located on, and his story is important not just locally, but nationally.
It's an interesting suggestion. The community naming is a community naming. So I think this would be the kind of name that would be submitted. The bid is obviously familiar with Earl Lloyd. His his image is on many of the banners that the bids put up throughout the neighborhood. So I appreciate the suggestion and look forward to the suggestion emerging in the community naming process. I will also say that the names, because we remind everybody about this, the names that the community submits and votes on ultimately are just recommendations to the DC Council and the mayor. Any names have to be enacted by the council and signed by the mayor.
So the first part, Robin, Eve, just is just kind of when that naming opportunity gets activated. When would that be initiated for this particular park?
Probably at some point when we're under construction. So maybe, kind of in the 4 to 6 month time frame probably, and we'll put out plenty of community notices about it. So
right. So then there's a question, perhaps this is Robin Eve. Could there be spray or sprinklers that could be used for little kids on this site?
Yeah, it's an interesting suggestion. Yeah, I don't know. There would obviously be a set of safety concerns that people would have to work through, but it's another one. That's why we have these meetings, to get interesting ideas like that. And like all the others.
Great. I'm scrolling and looking for questions. There are some other questions. So we'll talk about timeline when we close, and we'll have Robin Eve just explain a little bit what to expect over the course of the next year or so. There is one more question that I'm seeing here, Robin Eve, that's more about the dog park than Swampoodle 2. And it's just around kind of how the park is being managed. And it says the dog park hasn't been serviced since the start of the pandemic. No waste bags for over 1 year. Board isn't responsive. Maybe you can just clarify kind of how those things get addressed or dealt with.
Yeah, well, I might actually put Nick a bit on the spot for this as the DPR representative. The Friends of NoMa Dogs is the DPR partner for maintaining this park. And I've heard some other concerns about the park maintenance, and I assume this comes up maybe more than never, Nick. Does DPR have an approach to how to deal with these?
So yeah, we have a liaison that works closely with our dog park group, all of our dog park groups and adopt a park groups across the city. And also have a liaison that works closely with DGS. So some of the larger maintenance issues would have to be addressed by our maintenance partners, DGS. But as Robin Eve said, the NoMa Dog Parks group should be responsible for the things mentioned in the comments, with replacing of the bags and smaller stuff of that nature. So I can put my email in the chat, and if that person wants to email me concerns, I can make sure it gets to the right folks at DPR so that we can follow up as well.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. And I think, so there are also a number of questions that were put into Q&A that were answered in a written form by the Lee and Associates and the NoMa Parks Foundation team. So I don't see any unless I'm missing something. And I don't see any more in chat. So I think we can wrap up. So Adrian and Robin Eve, really appreciate you fielding so many questions and in such a thorough manner. So appreciate that. So we're going to, before we move into next steps, where Robin Eve actually will explain a little bit more about the process after this evening, we're going to move next to a few polling questions. So get ready to answer. I think we've got 5 total that we're going to do in 2 sets. So if we can bring up the polling slide, Kim, and then I will launch. Let's see here. All right. So there are 2 questions. You'll need to scroll a little bit to get to the second one. So the first one is just about the mural that's currently on the site and your perspective on it. And then the second one is around the roadbed design. around the crossing that Adrian talked about. So, you know, should the design for the pedestrian crossing focus on the safest one at the corner, or should it be mid-block? What's your the strongest answer for number one is that I don't feel strongly about it, about 60%. 14% absolutely love it, 14% prefer a more natural appearance on the wall, and 14% not sure. So there's a pretty small percentage of folks that really, really love that particular design. And I know folks, at least a couple folks are still a little bit confused by this question, but it sounds like that 50% are open to something occurring on a kind of a wider crossing than at the intersection. Quarter no, and another quarter approximately not. So this is about what kinds of uses might there be for this park. You can check all of them if you care to. You can check other. You can only pick. You can pick one if it's only one. But what kinds of uses might there be for the park that you're most interested in, or that you think others would be interested in? So you can check all that apply there. And if you have other, you can put your idea for other in the chat, just so we capture that. Second question, if you scroll down, what uses might there be for the container? And again, it can be check all that apply, so it doesn't have to be just one answer. If your answer is other, if you could put in the chat what that idea is, that would be great, and indicate you're talking about the container. And then the third is around what kind of community partner makes sense. And if it's more than one, you can check more than one there. Lots of responses to the first one. So the top one is informal use, whether that's individual or family, close to 90%. We have two responses that are in kind of the 2/3 territory, small community gatherings and occasional unamplified music or performance, and almost a half for toddler play and other. So again, if you didn't type what other is to this first one, put it in the chat, indicate what that other is. Uses for the container. So again, it looks like there was only the option in terms of the way we set it up for one answer. So if there are other answers that you wanted to cast your vote for, put that in chat. The top one that was put in was at 37% small scale play, equipment and games at 37%. Two are tied for second, store furniture and other. And again, if you have specific things in mind for what that other would be, please put them in the chat. And then what opportunities would make sense for the community to partner on this park? Close to 80% use in programming, close to 2/3 maintenance, close to a half funding support, and then again, about 20% other. So again, if there are specific organizations or types of organizations that you have in mind that we might partner with for this park, put that in the chat. That would be great. We'd love to hear your specific idea. All right, so now we're going to move to a specific chat question. So we're hoping everyone will answer this. So you had an opportunity to look at lots of aspects of the design of this particular proposal. And we would love to hear what you like or even love about the recommended design. Put those in the chat right now. And you see one of our staffers put in the question itself, so in the chat itself. So I'm going to give you like 60 seconds to just take the time, think about what you really like about or love about the design. And if we could bring back some more music, that would be great. We lose the music, but we get the design, which is great. So this is the up there on the screen now is the whole design. So for folks who need a visual to kind of prompt what you like and love. So loving the use of the string lights. Someone anticipated our next question, which was, what don't you love? The oversized chess pieces, they could get lost. Someone likes the amphitheater aspect of the design. Someone likes just overall, it's a nice compliment to Swampoodle 1. Someone said visually appealing. Emma, thank you. Gorgeous and has multiple uses for different activities. Joe likes the seating areas and shade and the creation of distinct spaces. Yeah, so I appreciate everyone sharing your ideas for that. And so why don't we keep that up? You won't get music. I won't sing for you, but the second chat question, if we can put it in, someone else likes the swings and slides, is it's the opposite. So is there anything that might concern you or that you don't particularly like? And someone, again, I said, maybe we shouldn't use chess pieces. They may get lost. So are there any other things that give you pause that you want to let us know about before we close out here? But while we're waiting for that, Matthew said, I like the use of grading using the existing hill to flow from Swampoodle over to the new park. Brian says there's no covering should there be a storm. So you can't kind of, during a thunderstorm or rainstorm or snowstorm, you can't get out of it unless you head on home. Someone said too much L Street. Not sure what that means, but there's a smiley face after that. Daniel says maintenance is a concern. Perhaps that's reflecting some of the issues that were across the street. The stairwares in the center is not a good use of the space. Someone also said no bathroom, don't love the fence. Feels like it doesn't blend with the rest of the neighborhood. Emily says just concern with traffic and pedestrian safety, also around shade issue. The shade issue being really important. So the trees obviously being really important. It says turn L Street into green space. D dot will get used to it. Okay, we'll pass that on. So great, and I don't have to read them all, but I appreciate you sharing your thoughts both about what really resonated with you with regard to what we presented tonight, and what are the things that we just need to make sure as this is moving towards final stages, what might need to be thought through just a little bit more. So again, we're capturing your ideas. So if you continue to have things that you want to share with us, you can continue to put them in chat. But I'm going to transition us to the next steps. And Robin Eve, I think I'm going to have you explain kind of not just what the bullets mean, but kind of what the overall time frame is for each of these different things.
Okay, thank you. You know, taking into account the feedback that we've received through our ANC reviews and the Environment, Parks and Event Committee review, and from our agency partners, and the Commission on Fine Arts review, which is coming up this coming Thursday, and then integrating all of that feedback into the design is really the next step. When that's finished, when we have a complete design, we would move forward with the permitting process. We have, you know, kind of tentatively started the contracting process. This will be our only park that will be a design build. We're pretty far along with the concept design, and we've worked previously with Lee and Associates. We're pretty comfortable with them, and with we probably use Forrester Construction, the same partner that did such a great job at Tanner Park in terms of building the park. So we're targeting project delivery in April of 2022. That's a year away from now. So we'll need to move, you know, very deliberately through the final design and permitting process, and also the contracting process. I saw a question in the chat, and it was asked previously, the naming process. We are looking at the naming process probably in the next 4 to 6 month range. Somewhere in there is when we would begin it. It takes a few months, and then we have to kind of gear it to the DC Council legislative calendar. We will keep, you know, we'll keep information on park progress under the working name Swampoodle 2 on the NoMa Parks website. So continue to look there. And we'll periodically, as things change, we'll send out announcements to the community in the form of our NoMa Parks newsletter. So I think that's all those questions, Steve.
Great. So I want to thank again Rob and Eve for hosting this meeting and for giving us the overall context and organizing this meeting. I want to thank Adrian McCrae and Lee Associates for their design and running through it in the presentation and answering all the different questions that we got. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. It's really important that we have your perspective as we move into the final stages of this. So thank you for your input throughout. We've got all your questions. We've got all your the information you put in chat, and we'll be using that as we move forward. So thank you for spending the evening with us. And we hope you have a great evening, and we'll stay in touch. And again, if you want more about the project, this project or other projects, go to nomaparks.org, and we hope you have a great evening.
And Steve, I want to thank everybody too, and thank everybody for, kind of their input starting in 2011. That's led us to this place. I mean, we didn't get here when we started on Swampoodle 2. We got here, after more than 10 years of very deliberate engagement with the community about the kinds of activities and aspirations and things they wanted to see in parks. So this has been a really satisfying journey with the community, and including thanking people on the ANC 60 who created the Environment, Parks and Events Committee just to work with us and be a community partner. So thanks to everybody, and thanks for your time this evening.
Good night, all.